The fluorescent lights in the precinct lobby buzzed with that familiar institutional hum that Robert Mitchell had hoped never to hear again. His wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs, and his uniform shirt, the same one he'd worn for his 12-hour shift the night before, carried the stale scent of cigarettes and desperation from the holding cell. As he walked through the heavy glass doors into the gray Boston morning light, Robert's first thought wasn't about the humiliation or the injustice of it all. It was about Lauren. His daughter would be getting ready for school right now, probably wondering where he was, why he hadn't come home. The thought of her waiting in their small apartment, checking her phone for a text that never came, made his chest tighten with a familiar ache, the same one he'd carried for 3 years now, ever since Sarah's funeral. Robert pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling fingers. 17 missed calls from Lauren. His heart lurched. "Papa?" Her voice was small when she answered on the first ring. "Papa, where are you? Mrs. Chen said you never came home, and I was so scared." "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm coming home now." Robert's voice cracked despite his efforts to sound strong. There was just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine, and they both knew it. The cab ride home in another driver's taxi since his own was still impounded. As evidence, took 23 minutes through the morning traffic of East Boston. Robert watched the familiar neighborhoods roll past the corner store, where he bought Lauren's favorite cereal when they had extra money. The park where Sarah used to take her to feed the ducks. The bus stop where his daughter waited each morning for her ride to Jefferson High School. This was his world, not the gleaming downtown hotels or the jazz clubs where wealthy women stumbled out of limousines. This was where he belonged, where he understood the rules, where a man's word still meant something, and neighbors looked out for each other's children. The apartment building at 1247 Maple Street had seen better decades. The beige stucco was cracked in places, and the wrought iron balconies had more rust than paint. But it was home. Robert climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor, his legs heavy with exhaustion and dread. How would he explain this to Lauren? How could he make her understand that sometimes the world just wasn't fair? No matter how hard you tried to do the right thing, the door opened before he could turn his key. "Papa!" Lauren threw her arms around him, and for a moment, Robert forgot about everything else. At 17, his daughter was nearly as tall as he was, with Sarah's warm brown eyes and the same stubborn chin that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. She pulled back to study his face, her hands still gripping his shoulders. "You look terrible," she said with a matter-of-fact honesty that reminded him so much of her mother. "What happened?" "Really?" Robert stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that opened into the living room, and a bathroom with a shower that only worked if you hit the handle just right. But Lauren had made it warm with her mother's quilts and the family photos that covered every available surface. The scent of coffee and cinnamon told him she'd made breakfast. Probably worried sick about him the entire time. "I helped someone," Robert said, sinking into the worn recliner that had been his refuge for the past 3 years. "A woman. She was drunk, about to fall into traffic. I steadied her, made sure she was safe." Lauren settled on the arm of his chair the way she used to when she was little, and he'd read to her before bed. "And they arrested you for that." "They saw what they expected to see, sweetheart." "A man like me and a woman like her?" Robert rubbed his eyes, feeling every one of his 53 years. Sometimes that's all it takes. The injustice of it burned in his throat like acid. He'd worked 2 jobs for most of Lauren's life, first as a mechanic, and then driving cab when his back couldn't handle the heavy lifting anymore. He'd never missed a parent-teacher conference or a school play. He voted in every election, paid his taxes, helped his neighbors when they needed it. He'd raised his daughter to believe that goodness mattered, that treating people with dignity and respect would be rewarded in kind. Last night had shattered that illusion like a brick through glass. "Papa," Lauren said gently, "you did the right thing. You know that, right?" Robert looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who'd learned to be strong too early, who helped with grocery shopping and never complained when they had to eat beans and rice for a week straight, who maintained a 3. 8 GPA while working part-time at the library to help with expenses. She was everything good about him and Sarah combined, and she deserved better than a father who got arrested for trying to help someone. I know, he said, though the words felt hollow, but knowing doesn't pay the rent, does it? Lauren's expression tightened. She was old enough to understand their financial situation, old enough to know that her father missing even one day of work could mean choosing between groceries and the electric bill. How bad is it? I don't know yet. Robert forced himself to be honest with her. He'd learned that lesson from Sarah, who'd always said that children could handle the truth better than they could handle being lied to. The cab's impounded. Could be a few days before I get it back. Maybe longer. I'll have to see about borrowing money to rent another one. Or, a knock at the door interrupted him. Robert and Lauren exchanged glances. They weren't expecting anyone, and unexpected visitors in their neighborhood were rarely good news. Through the peephole, Robert saw Mrs. Chen from apartment 2C holding a covered plate. He opened the door to find the elderly woman's concerned face creased with worry. Robert, thank goodness you're home. Lauren was so frightened last night. Mrs. Chen pushed past him into the apartment with the familiarity of someone who'd become family over the years. She'd been Sarah's friend first, had held Lauren when she cried at the funeral, had brought soup when Robert came down with pneumonia the winter after his wife died. I'm sorry she bothered you, Robert said, accepting the plate of what smelled like her famous pork dumplings. Don't be ridiculous. That child is never a bother. Mrs. Chen settled into the kitchen chair with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak her mind. Now, what's this about you being arrested? Robert told the story again, watching Mrs. Chen's expression grow darker with each detail. She'd lived through enough decades to understand how the world worked, how men like Robert were often presumed guilty until proven innocent, how wealth and poverty existed in different universes with different rules. This is not right, she said when he finished. This is not justice. No, Robert agreed, but it's reality. So what will you do? It was the question Robert had been dreading. His savings account had exactly $347 in it, not enough to rent a cab for more than a few days. Certainly not enough to hire a lawyer if charges were filed. He had a clean record. But that didn't matter if the woman decided to press charges, if the media got hold of the story, if his reputation in the tight-knit cab driver community was destroyed. I'll figure something out, he said, because that's what fathers did. They figured things out, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. Lauren squeezed his shoulder. We'll figure it out, she corrected, and Robert's heart swelled with pride and guilt in equal measure. She shouldn't have to worry about adult problems, shouldn't have to be his partner in survival at 17. But Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, and they'd learned to be a team, whether they wanted to or not. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Lauren answered it, her voice cautious. Mitchell residence. Yes, he's here. Who's calling? Please. Her eyes widened as she looked at Robert. It's someone from the police station. They want to talk to you. Robert's stomach clenched as he took the phone, expecting the worst, more charges perhaps, a court date, the beginning of the end of everything he'd worked so hard to build. Mr. Mitchell, this is Sergeant Davis from the downtown precinct. I need you to come in this morning. There's been a development in your case. What kind of development? The complainant wants to speak with you. She's here now, and she's asking specifically for you. Can you be here within the hour? Robert looked at Lauren and Mrs. Chen, both watching him with worried expressions. The complainant? The woman he tried to help. What could she possibly want with him now? I'll be there, he said, and hung up. No. Lauren was already reaching for her jacket. I'm coming with you. No, sweetheart. You have school, and I don't want you anywhere near Papa. Her voice carried the same gentle firmness that Sarah had used when she'd made up her mind about something. I'm 17, not 7, and you're not going through this alone. Robert looked at his daughter, this fierce, loyal young woman who'd inherited the best of both her parents, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. In the past 18 hours, he'd been humiliated, degraded, and treated like a criminal. But he'd also been reminded of what mattered most: the people who loved him, who believed in him, who stood by him when the world seemed determined to tear him down. He'd built a good life on the foundation of that love. Whatever happened next, whatever the wealthy woman wanted to say to him, he wouldn't let it destroy what he and Lauren had built together. "All right," he said, pulling on his jacket. "But we stop by the school first so you can tell them you'll be late." As they walked down the stairs together, Robert caught sight of his reflection in Mrs. Chen's window. He looked older than his 53 years, worn down by responsibility and loss, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. But he also looked like a man who'd raised a remarkable daughter, who'd loved a wonderful woman, who'd built something meaningful from the pieces of a working-class life. Whatever waited for him at the police station, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else since Sarah's death: with dignity, with love for his family, and with the quiet strength that came from knowing who he was and what he stood for. The wealthy woman could have her limousines and her jazz clubs and her world where money solved every problem. Robert had something better. He had Lauren and Mrs. Chen and the warm wedding ring on his finger that reminded him every day that he'd been loved by someone extraordinary. That was worth more than all the money in the world. And if the events of last night had taught him anything, it was that sometimes the most important moments in life came disguised as disasters. And the people who seemed like strangers might just turn out to be exactly who you needed to meet. The downtown precinct looked different in daylight, less menacing. More like what it was: a tired government building where tired people processed the endless complications of urban life. Robert walked through the same doors he'd been dragged through 12 hours earlier, but this time Lauren was beside him, her hand briefly touching his elbow in support. Sergeant Davis met them in the lobby, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and kindness. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Ms. Reynolds is waiting in conference room 2. "Reynolds," Lauren whispered as they followed the sergeant down a hallway lined with missing person posters and community service announcements. "The woman from last night," Robert murmured back. The name meant nothing to him. He'd grown up in neighborhoods where people were known by their first names and the work they did, not by surnames that might appear in newspaper business sections. The conference room was small and windowless, furnished with a metal table and plastic chairs that had seen better decades. The woman sitting on the far side looked nothing like the disoriented stranger Robert had encountered outside the jazz club. This version of Catherine Reynolds was composed, alert, and unmistakably powerful. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Robert made in 2 months. Her posture was perfect, her makeup flawless, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. Everything about her spoke of control, of a life lived with precision and purpose. But her eyes told a different story. They were the same eyes Robert had seen in his bathroom mirror for the past 3 years, the eyes of someone carrying a weight that money couldn't lift. "Mr. Mitchell," she stood as they entered, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Catherine Reynolds. I owe you an apology and a great deal more." Robert shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "This is my daughter, Lauren." "Miss Guy Reynolds," Lauren said politely. Though Robert could hear the protective edge in her voice, Catherine gestured for them to sit. "Please, call me Catherine. What I have to say is going to sound strange, but I need you to hear me out." She reached into an expensive leather briefcase and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table. The card was heavy stock, embossed with gold lettering, Reynolds Hotels International, Catherine Reynolds, Chief Executive Officer. Robert stared at the card. He'd driven past the Reynolds Grand downtown countless times, had dropped off passengers at the elegant lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. He'd never imagined that the woman who owned that empire was the same person he'd found slumped against a broken limousine. "I remember everything that happened last night," Catherine said quietly. "Every detail. How you approached me with such care. How you asked if I was all right. How you kept me from falling when I lost my balance. You probably saved my life. Mr. Mitchell, traffic on that street at that time of night, I could have been killed. I just did what anyone would do, Robert said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. No, Catherine's voice was firm. Most people would have crossed the street, avoided getting involved. You stopped your taxi, got out in the rain, and helped a stranger, and for that kindness, you were arrested, humiliated, and spent the night in jail while your daughter worried herself sick. Lauren shifted in her chair. He's a good man, she said simply. He's always helping people. Catherine smiled, the first genuine expression Robert had seen from her. I can see that, and I can see where he learned it. She turned back to Robert. I've already spoken with the district attorney. All charges have been dropped. There will be no record of your arrest, no mark on your record, but that's not enough. Not nearly enough. It's enough, Robert said quickly. I just want my cab back and to get back to work. Your cab has been released and is waiting in the impound lot. The fees have been waived. Catherine leaned forward, her expression intense. But I have a proposition for you, and I hope you'll consider it carefully. Robert felt Lauren tense beside him. Propositions from wealthy people rarely worked out well for people like them. I need a driver, Catherine continued. Not just any driver. I need someone I can trust. Someone with integrity. Someone who won't judge me for my mistakes. I need that for 30 days. You must have drivers already, Lauren said skeptically. Someone like me, Catherine began. Someone like you, Lauren interrupted, has employees, not allies. Exactly, Catherine said with a sad smile. I have a staff that manages my schedule, protects my image, and reports to my board of directors. What I need is someone who will help me do something I should have done years ago. She paused, seeming to gather her courage. I'm an alcoholic, Mr. Mitchell. Last night wasn't an aberration. It was Tuesday. I've been drinking myself to death for the better part of 5 years. Ever since my parents died and left me alone with an empire I never wanted to run. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Robert had known addicts, had lost friends to drugs and alcohol, had seen families destroyed by substances that promised relief but delivered only pain. But he'd never heard someone speak about their addiction with such clinical honesty. I've tried to quit before, Catherine continued. Rehab facilities, private therapists, interventions staged by well-meaning board members. But I've never tried recovery with someone who has nothing to gain from my success or failure. Someone who sees me as a human being, not as a business asset. What exactly are you asking? Robert said carefully. I want to hire you as my sober companion and driver for 30 days. You'll drive me to AA meetings, to therapy appointments, to the places I need to go to rebuild my life. In exchange, I'll pay you $5,000 a week, Lauren gasped. $20,000, more than Robert made in 6 months of 12-hour shifts. Enough to pay off their credit cards, fix the car, maybe even start a college fund for Lauren. That's too much, Robert said immediately. I can't accept. It's not charity. Catherine's voice was crisp, businesslike. It's a job, and frankly, you'd be earning every penny. Do you have any idea how difficult I can be when I'm fighting my own demons? You'd be working harder than you've ever worked in your life. Robert studied her face, looking for the catch, the hidden agenda, the strings that always came attached to offers that seemed too good to be true. But all he saw was a woman who was tired of being alone with her pain. Why me, he asked. You could hire anyone. Professionals who know about addiction, people with training. Because you helped me when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Catherine said simply. Because your daughter defends you like you're the most important person in her world. Because you'd rather sleep in your car than accept money you haven't earned. Because you're exactly the kind of person I need to remind me who I want to become. Lauren touched Robert's arm. Papa, she whispered, $20,000 could change everything for us. Robert knew she was right. $20,000 would mean Lauren could focus on her studies instead of working at the library. It would mean they could move to a better apartment, maybe even in a different school district. It would mean security, opportunity, a chance at the kind of life Sarah had always wanted for their daughter. But it would also mean accepting help, admitting that he couldn't provide for his family on his own. It would mean entering a world he didn't understand, with rules he didn't know, surrounded by people who spoke a different language of privilege and power. "I need time to think about it," Robert said. Catherine nodded. "Of course, but I should mention there's another factor to consider." She reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a thick legal document. "The city's insurance company has contacted me about a potential lawsuit, wrongful arrest, violation of civil rights, damage to reputation. They're concerned about liability." Robert's stomach clenched. "I don't want to sue anyone. I know, but they don't know that. And frankly, you'd have every right to pursue legal action. What happened to you was wrong, Mr. Mitchell, legally and morally wrong." Catherine's expression hardened. "I've spent my entire adult life watching men in expensive suits make problems disappear with money and lawyers. I won't be part of that system anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you work with me for 30 days, I'll make sure you're compensated fairly for what you've been put through. But more than that, I'll make sure this never happens again to you or to anyone else. I have influence in this city, and I intend to use it to demand better training for police officers, better protocols for handling situations involving vulnerable people." Lauren was staring at Catherine with something approaching awe. "You do that, really?" "Your father helped me when I needed it most," Catherine said. "It's time I learned to help others the same way." Robert felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart since Sarah's death. This woman was offering him more than money. She was offering him purpose, dignity, a chance to be part of something bigger than survival. 30 days, he said slowly. "And then what? Then you go back to your life, and I go back to mine. No strings, no obligations, just two people who helped each other when it mattered most." Robert looked at Lauren, who was nodding encouragingly. He thought about Mrs. Chen, who'd always told him that opportunities came disguised as challenges. He thought about Sarah, who'd believed that people were fundamentally good, that kindness was never wasted, that taking care of each other was what made life worth living. "All right," he said finally. 30 days, but I have conditions." Catherine smiled a real smile this time, warm and grateful. "Name them." "My daughter comes first. Always, if she needs me, I go. No questions asked." "Agreed. I drive my own cab, not some fancy car. I'm a cab driver, not a chauffeur." "Fair enough. And if I think you're in danger from alcohol or anything else, I call 911. I won't enable your addiction, no matter how much you're paying me." Catherine extended her hand across the table. "Mr. Mitchell, I think this might be the beginning of a very interesting partnership." As Robert shook her hand, he felt the weight of the business card in his other palm. 24 hours ago, he'd been a struggling cab driver with nothing but his dignity and his love for his daughter. Now he was embarking on a journey with a billionaire who needed his help to find her way back to herself. He had no idea what the next 30 days would bring. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Robert Mitchell felt like he was moving towards something instead of just trying to survive each day as it came. Outside the conference room window, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the city he'd called home for his entire life. Somewhere out there, his cab was waiting to take him on the strangest journey of his life. And despite everything, the arrest, the humiliation, the uncertainty, Robert found himself looking forward to the road ahead. The Reynolds estate sat behind iron gates on the city's north side. In a neighborhood where the houses had names instead of numbers and the lawns looked like golf courses, Robert had driven through these streets before, dropping off passengers at charity galas and corporate events. But he'd never imagined he'd be walking up the front steps of one of these mansions as anything other than hired help, which he supposed he still was. The front door opened before he could ring the bell, revealing a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested decades of managing other people's lives. She wore a simple black dress and sensible shoes, but her manner was anything but subservient. "You must be Mr. Mitchell," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Margaret Wilson, Miss Reynolds' personal assistant. She's told me about your arrangement." Robert shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way her eyes assessed him quickly but not unkindly. Nice to meet you. She's waiting in the study. Follow me, please. The interior of the house was everything Robert had expected and nothing like he'd imagined. Yes, there were marble floors and crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than his annual salary. But there was also a lived-in quality that surprised him, books scattered on side tables, reading glasses left on chair arms, a coffee mug with a lipstick stain on the rim. This was someone's home, not just a showcase. Mr. Mitchell is here, Margaret announced, opening the door to a room lined floor to ceiling with books. Catherine looked up from behind an enormous desk covered with papers and file folders. She was dressed more casually today, dark slacks and a cream-colored sweater, but she still carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. Robert, thank you for coming. She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of researching AA meetings in the area. There's one this afternoon at St. Mark's Episcopal. It might work well for a first attempt. Robert settled into the chair, which was more comfortable than anything in his apartment. You've never been to a meeting before? I've been to meetings, Catherine said carefully, but I've never been to a meeting where I intended to actually participate. There's a difference between showing up because your lawyer insists and showing up because you want to get better. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small plastic chip, setting it on the desk between them. It was white, with 90 days printed in blue letters. I've been carrying this around for 2 years, she said. I bought it online, told myself I'd earned it, but we both know that's not how it works. Robert picked up the chip, surprised by how light it was. You've never had 90 days sober. I've had 90 hours, maybe once. I managed 96. Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. I'm what they call a high-functioning alcoholic, which means I've gotten very good at managing my drinking around my responsibilities. Board meetings at 10, martinis at lunch, conference calls at 3, wine with dinner, scotch before bed, rinse and repeat. What made you decide to stop? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at gardens that were probably tended by a full-time staff. I woke up 3 mornings ago on my bathroom floor, still wearing my clothes from the night before. I'd missed a board meeting, something I've never done in 20 years of running this company. My assistant had to lie to the board. Tell them I had food poisoning. She turned back to him, and Robert saw something raw in her expression. I realized I was one blackout away from losing everything my parents built. More than that, I was one blackout away from dying alone, and no one would find me for days. The honesty was uncomfortable in its starkness. Robert had seen addiction up close. His brother Daniel had struggled with cocaine for years before finally getting clean, but he'd never heard someone describe their rock bottom with such clinical precision. The meeting starts at 5, Catherine continued. I thought we could leave around 4:30. Give ourselves time to find parking and get settled. All right, what should I expect? I don't know, Catherine admitted. I've only been to private sessions with therapists who charge $500 an hour and tell me what they think I want to hear. This will be different. At 4:15, Robert was waiting in the circular driveway beside his cab when Catherine emerged from the house. She'd changed into jeans and a simple blouse, as if trying to blend in, but everything about her still screamed money and privilege. It wasn't just the clothes or the jewelry. It was the way she moved, the set of her shoulders, the unconscious assumption that the world would accommodate her needs. Ready? Robert asked as she settled into the back seat. No, Catherine said, but let's go anyway. St. Mark's Episcopal Church was a modest brick building in a middle-class neighborhood, surrounded by minivans and aging sedans. Robert's yellow cab looked perfectly at home in the parking lot, which seemed to ease some of Catherine's tension. It looks so normal, she said as they walked toward the entrance. What were you expecting? I don't know. Something more institutional. I suppose more clinical. The meeting was held in the church's fellowship hall, a room with folding chairs arranged in a circle and a coffee pot that had seen better decades. About 15 people were already seated, ranging in age from perhaps 25 to 70. Dressed in everything from work uniforms to business casual, Robert took a seat near the back, but Catherine hesitated in the doorway. For a moment, he thought she might bolt, might retreat to the safety of her mansion and her carefully controlled world. But then a woman with graying hair and kind eyes approached them. "First time?" she asked gently. "Yes," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Julie. I've been coming here for about 6 years now. Would you like to sit with me?" Catherine glanced back at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm Catherine, and yes, that would be nice." Robert watched as Julie led Catherine to chairs in the middle of the circle, chatting quietly about the format of the meeting and the people they'd be sitting with. It was the first time he'd seen anyone treat Catherine as just another person seeking help. And the effect was immediate. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing seemed to ease. The meeting followed a familiar pattern that Robert recognized from the few Al-Anon sessions he'd attended during Daniel's worst years, stories shared. Wisdom offered, struggles acknowledged without judgment. But what struck him most was how Catherine listened, truly listened to each person who spoke. When it came her turn to share, she simply said, "I'm Catherine, and I'm an alcoholic. This is my first meeting, and I'm here because I'm tired of being afraid of my own life." The group welcomed her with murmured affirmations, and Robert saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen before: hope. Perhaps, or at least the possibility of hope, after the meeting. They stood outside the church as other members chatted in small groups before heading to their cars. Catherine seemed reluctant to leave, as if she wanted to absorb every detail of the experience. "How do you feel?" Robert asked as they walked to the cab. "Terrified," Catherine said honestly, "but also lighter, somehow. Does that make sense?" It makes perfect sense. During the drive back to her house, Catherine was unusually quiet. Robert let the silence stretch, understanding that she was processing something important. Finally, as they turned into her neighborhood, she spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about doing what anyone would do. But the truth is, most people in my position wouldn't have stopped to help a stranger. We're trained from childhood to avoid messy situations, to let other people handle problems." "But you would have," Robert said, "if you'd been sober, if you'd seen someone in trouble. You would have helped. How can you be so sure?" Robert pulled into her driveway and turned to look at her. "Because you're here. Because instead of pretending last night never happened, you're trying to make it right. Because you're paying a stranger more money than he's ever seen to help you get better. That's not the behavior of someone who doesn't care about other people." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then smiled a small, tentative expression that transformed her face. "Thank you, Robert, for today, for believing in me when I'm not sure I believe in myself," as she walked toward her front door. Robert noticed something different in her step, not confidence exactly, but purpose. The woman who'd stumbled outside the jazz club 3 nights ago had been lost, drowning in her own despair. The woman walking up these steps was still struggling, still afraid, but she was moving forward instead of just surviving. His phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How was the first day? Are you okay?" Robert smiled as he typed back, "Fine, sweetheart. See you at dinner." Shurakin. But as he drove home through the familiar streets of his neighborhood, Robert found himself thinking about the expression on Catherine's face during the meeting, the hunger in her eyes as she listened to other people's stories of recovery and relapse. Hope and despair. She was searching for something, just as he'd been searching for 3 years now. Ever since Sarah's death had left him unmoored in his own life. Maybe that was why this arrangement felt right. Despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, they were both trying to find their way back to themselves, to remember who they'd been before life had taught them to expect disappointment and loss. Tomorrow would bring another meeting, another small step toward whatever healing looked like for a billionaire who'd forgotten how to trust, and a cab driver who'd forgotten how to hope for anything beyond making it through another day. But today had been a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. The second week of their arrangement began with an unexpected request. Instead of heading to an AA meeting or therapy appointment, Catherine asked Robert to drive her to the grocery store. The grocery store, Robert repeated. Sure, you don't have people who do your shopping. I have people who do everything, Catherine said as they pulled out of her driveway. I haven't been inside a grocery store in probably 5 years, but yesterday at the meeting, Julie was talking about the importance of normal activities in recovery. She said, shopping for your own food, cooking your own meals, it grounds you in reality. Robert navigated toward the market basket on Cambridge Street, trying to imagine this elegant woman pushing a shopping cart down fluorescent-lit aisles. You know how to cook? I used to. My mother taught me when I was young. Before, Catherine paused, then continued more quietly. Before I learned that wealthy people don't cook for themselves. The grocery store was busy with the usual Thursday afternoon crowd, mothers with toddlers in tow, elderly couples consulting carefully written lists, teenagers buying energy drinks and chips. Catherine stood at the entrance for a moment, overwhelmed by the sensory assault of bright lights, competing conversations, and the general chaos of ordinary life. It's louder than I remembered, she said. Robert grabbed a cart and handed it to her. You get used to it. Lauren and I usually shop on Sunday mornings when it's quieter, but she had a school project, so I came yesterday instead. As they walked through the produce section, Robert watched Catherine examine vegetables with the concentration of someone trying to decode a foreign language. She picked up a tomato, turned it over in her hands, and looked at him helplessly. How do you know if it's ripe? Here, Robert said, showing her how to check for firmness, for the right color, for the sweet smell that indicated freshness. Sarah taught me that. She said a good tomato was the foundation of any decent meal. Tell me about her, Catherine said as they moved to the herbs. Your wife. Robert found himself talking as they shopped, sharing memories that he usually kept carefully locked away. Sarah's laugh, which had been too loud for fancy restaurants but perfect for their kitchen table, her terrible attempts at singing while she cooked, the way she'd dance while stirring sauce, pulling Lauren into impromptu salsa lessons between the stove and the refrigerator. She sounds wonderful, Catherine said softly. She was. She made everything better just by being there. Our apartment, our neighborhood, our whole world. Robert paused, suddenly aware of how much he was sharing. After she died, I didn't know how to live in that world without her. They'd stopped in the cereal aisle, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Catherine spoke. I think that's what alcohol was for me, a way to live in a world that felt impossible to navigate sober. When my parents died, I inherited this empire that I never wanted, surrounded by people who saw me as a business asset rather than a person. Drinking was the only way I could tolerate the loneliness. But you're not drinking now, Robert pointed out. No, but I'm not exactly living either. I'm existing, following a routine, going through the motions. There's a difference. They finished shopping in companionable silence, Catherine carefully reading labels and comparing prices with the focus of someone learning a new skill. At the checkout line, she watched the process with fascination, the bagger's efficient movements, the cashier's practiced small talk, the ordinary choreography of daily life. $67.32, the cashier announced. Catherine reached for her wallet, but Robert gently touched her arm. Watch first, he suggested. She observed as Robert counted out exact change, noting how he organized his bills, how he waited for the receipt, how he thanked the cashier by name. It was a master class in normalcy, and Robert realized that for all her wealth and sophistication, Catherine was essentially learning how to be a regular person. In the parking lot, as they loaded groceries into the cab, Catherine said, I want to cook dinner tonight, for you and Lauren. If you'd be willing to come. Robert hesitated. Sharing meals felt too intimate, too much like friendship rather than the professional arrangement they'd agreed to maintain. But the hope in her voice reminded him of Lauren when she learned to make pancakes, proud and eager to share her newfound skill. Are you sure Lauren can be pretty direct about food she doesn't like? I'm sure. Besides, if it's terrible, you can always order pizza. That evening, Robert and Lauren arrived at the Reynolds estate to find Catherine in the kitchen, a massive space with commercial-grade appliances and enough counter space for a restaurant. She changed into an apron that looked brand new and was standing over a recipe book with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. "Smells good in here," Lauren said politely, though Robert could tell she was nervous about this breach of their usual routine. "I'm making my mother's chicken piccata," Catherine said, looking up with flour on her cheek. "Or attempting to. I haven't made it in 20 years, so this could be an adventure." Lauren moved closer to the stove, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. "What's that you're doing to the chicken?" "Pounding it flat so it cooks evenly." "Would you like to try?" For the next hour, Robert watched his daughter and his employer work side by side, Catherine patiently teaching Lauren techniques that had been passed down through generations of Reynolds women. The kitchen filled with the sounds of sizzling butter, clinking glasses, and Lauren's laughter as she tried to flip a piece of chicken and nearly launched it across the room. "Your daughter is remarkable," Catherine said quietly as Lauren concentrated on stirring the sauce. "She has your kindness, but also something else, a strength that goes beyond her years." "She had to grow up fast after Sarah died," Robert said. "Maybe too fast." "No, I don't think so. I think she grew up exactly as much as she needed to, and no more. That's a gift." Robert, knowing how to adapt without losing herself in the process, turned in when they finally sat down to eat. The piccata was slightly overcooked, and the sauce a bit too thick, but it tasted like care and effort, and the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with people who mattered. Lauren told Catherine about her classes, her part-time job at the library, her plans for college if they could figure out how to afford it. "What do you want to study?" Catherine asked. "Social work," Lauren said without hesitation. "I want to help families like ours, people who work hard but still struggle, who need advocates to navigate systems that weren't designed for them." Catherine glanced at Robert, understanding passing between them. "That's a wonderful goal. The world needs more people who understand what it's like to fight for every opportunity." After dinner, Lauren insisted on helping with the dishes despite Catherine's protests. As they worked together at the enormous sink, Robert found himself studying the scene, his teenage daughter teaching a billionaire the most efficient way to scrape plates, both of them laughing at some shared joke. "Papa," Lauren said as they drove home, "she's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone colder. I guess more removed from real life. But she listened to everything I said like it actually mattered to her, and she's really trying. Isn't she, with the meetings and cooking and everything?" "Yes, she's trying." "Good, because I think she needs us. Maybe not our money or anything like that, but our—" Lauren paused, searching for the right word. "Our humanity, I guess. She's forgotten how to be around regular people." Robert marveled at his daughter's insight. At 17, Lauren could see things that had taken him days to understand. Catherine wasn't just hiring him to drive her to meetings. She was paying him to remember how to live in the world as something other than a business empire or a public persona. When his phone rang the next morning, Robert expected it to be Catherine confirming their meeting schedule. Instead, it was Margaret Wilson, her assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm calling to thank you," Margaret said. "I've worked for Ms. Reynolds for 8 years, and yesterday was the first time I've seen her truly relaxed. Whatever you and your daughter did, the cooking, the conversation, the normalcy of it, she's different today. Calmer, more present." "We just had dinner," Robert said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No, it was more than that. You treated her like family, and she needs that more than she knows how to ask for it." After he hung up, Robert thought about Margaret's words. In the space of 10 days, his relationship with Catherine had evolved from professional obligation to something more complex. She wasn't just his employer anymore. She was becoming a friend, someone whose struggles he understood because they echoed his own. But friendship with someone like Catherine carried risks that went beyond the obvious differences in their social and economic status. When the 30 days ended, she would return to her world of board meetings and charity galas, while he went back to driving cab, worrying about rent Getting too attached, letting Lauren get too attached would only lead to disappointment when reality reasserted itself. Still, as he prepared for another day of AA meetings and quiet conversations, Robert found himself looking forward to seeing Catherine's face light up when she mastered some small piece of ordinary life, whatever complications lay ahead. Helping her rediscover her humanity was turning out to be good for his own soul, too, and sometimes that was reason enough to take the risk. The call came at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday, jarring Robert from the deepest sleep he'd had in weeks. His phone buzzed against the nightstand with an urgency that immediately set his heart racing. Calls at this hour were never good news. "Papa," Lauren's voice was small and strained. "Papa, I need you." Robert was out of bed before she finished the sentence, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt while cradling the phone against his shoulder. "What's wrong? Sweetheart, where are you?" "I'm at the hospital, Boston General. I was studying late, and suddenly I couldn't breathe, and my chest hurt so much. Mrs. Chen called 911. The drive to the hospital took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Robert's hands shook on the steering wheel as he navigated empty streets, his mind cycling through every worst-case scenario. Lauren was 17, healthy, strong, but so had Sarah been, until the day she collapsed at work and never came home. The emergency room at Boston General was brightly lit and mostly empty at this hour. Robert found Lauren in bed 3, hooked up to monitors and looking smaller than she had since childhood. Her face was pale but alert, and she managed a weak smile when she saw him. "Hey, Papa. Sorry I scared you." "Don't apologize for scaring me," Robert said, taking her hand. "Just tell me what happened." A young doctor with tired eyes and scrubs pulled back the curtain. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Patel. Your daughter had what appears to be a severe anxiety attack, complicated by some dehydration and exhaustion. Her vitals are stable now, but we want to keep her for observation for a few more hours." "Anxiety attack?" Robert looked at Lauren in confusion. "You've never had anxiety problems." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "I've been having them for weeks, Papa, ever since you got arrested. I keep thinking about what would happen to me if something happened to you if you went to jail. If I ended up alone, I know it's stupid, but I can't stop worrying about everything." Robert felt his heart break and mend simultaneously. His strong, capable daughter had been carrying this fear in silence, trying to protect him from her own vulnerability, just as he'd been trying to protect her from their financial struggles. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you have enough to worry about. You're working this new job, dealing with Catherine's problems, trying to take care of me. I didn't want to add to your stress." Dr. Patel cleared his throat gently. "Anxiety in teenagers often manifests during times of family stress or major life changes. It's more common than you might think and very treatable. But Lauren needs rest, better nutrition, and probably some counseling to develop coping strategies. Whatever she needs," Robert said immediately, though his mind was already calculating the cost of therapy sessions they couldn't afford. "Papa," Lauren whispered, "I'm scared. What if this happens again? What if I can't handle college or life or—" "Hey," Robert squeezed her hand. "Remember what your mother used to say? We're Mitchells. We bend, but we don't break. You're going to be fine, and we're going to figure this out. Together." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert's phone buzzed with a text message. At 2:30 in the morning, there was only one person who might be contacting him. "Is everything all right? I couldn't sleep and noticed your location has been at the hospital for an hour." Robert stared at the message, surprised by the concern and the fact that Catherine was apparently awake at this hour. He typed back quickly, "Lauren in ER. Anxiety attack. We'll be here a while." The response came immediately. "On my way." "Who was that?" Lauren asked. "Catherine." "She's coming." Lauren's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching panic. "Papa, no. I look terrible, and I don't want her to see me like this. She's going to think our family is falling apart." "Our family's not falling apart," Robert said firmly. "And Catherine has seen enough of her own dark moments to understand that we all struggle sometimes." 20 minutes later, Catherine appeared in the emergency room wearing jeans, sneakers, and a Northwestern University sweatshirt that made her look like any worried parent rather than a hotel magnate. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried 2 coffee cups and a small bag from the hospital gift shop. "How is she?" Catherine asked quietly, settling into the plastic chair beside Robert. "Physically fine. Emotionally?" Robert shrugged helplessly. "I should have seen the signs. Should have known she was struggling. You can't protect her from everything." "Robert, trust me, I've tried that approach with people I care about, and it doesn't work." Catherine pulled a small stuffed animal from the gift shop bag, a teddy bear wearing scrubs and a stethoscope. "For Lauren, I know she's 17, but sometimes we all need something to hold on to." When Dr. Patel returned with discharge papers, he took Robert aside for a private conversation about Lauren's treatment options. The recommended therapy would cost $200 per session, and insurance would cover only a fraction of the cost. "I'll figure something out," Robert told the doctor, though he had no idea how, as they prepared to leave. Catherine approached Lauren's bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Sweetheart, embarrassed," Lauren said honestly, "and scared. What if this happens again?" Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, her expression gentle but serious. "Can I tell you something about anxiety? It's your brain trying to protect you from dangers that might not even be real. For years, my anxiety told me that everyone I cared about would eventually leave me, so I stopped letting myself care about anyone. But you know what I learned. Avoiding the fear just makes it stronger." "How do you make it go away?" "You don't make it go away. You learn to carry it differently. You build a life so strong and full of love that the anxiety becomes just one voice among many, instead of the only voice you hear." Lauren clutched the teddy bear to her chest. "Thank you for coming. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Catherine said simply. This is what people do for each other. In the hospital parking lot, as they prepared to follow Robert and Lauren home, Catherine touched his arm. "The therapy sessions Lauren needs, let me handle the cost." "Catherine, no, I can't accept. This isn't charity. Robert, this is family taking care of family. And whether you're ready to admit it or not, that's what we've become." Robert wanted to argue, to maintain the boundaries that had kept him safe for 3 years. But looking at Lauren's pale face in the rearview mirror, seeing the exhaustion and fear in her eyes, he realized that his pride was a luxury his daughter couldn't afford. "All right," he said quietly, "but I pay you back when I can." "We'll figure something out," Catherine said, echoing his earlier words to the doctor. The drive home was quiet, Lauren dozing in the back seat while Robert processed the night's revelations. His daughter was struggling with anxiety that stemmed, at least in part, from their precarious financial situation and his arrest 2 weeks ago. Catherine had dropped everything to rush to the hospital, had stayed through the uncertainty and paperwork, had offered help without hesitation or judgment. At some point during the longest night he'd experienced since Sarah's death, the careful professional distance he'd maintained between himself and Catherine had collapsed entirely. She was no longer his employer. She was someone who cared about his family, someone he trusted with his daughter's well-being, someone who understood that love sometimes meant showing up at 2:30 in the morning with coffee and a stuffed animal. As he helped Lauren into bed and watched her fall asleep clutching the teddy bear, Robert realized that the walls he'd built around his heart were crumbling piece by piece. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that he and Lauren were better off alone, that independence was safer than vulnerability, that asking for help was a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. But tonight had taught him something different. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let someone else share your burden. Sometimes family was found rather than born. And sometimes the people who needed saving ended up doing the rescuing instead. Outside Lauren's bedroom window, the first light of dawn was breaking over the city. In a few hours, he'd drive Catherine to another AA meeting, and they'd continue the careful work of rebuilding their lives one day at a time. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between crisis and comfort, between fear and love. They were no longer just employer and employee, or even friends helping each other through difficult times. They were becoming something deeper, more permanent, more necessary to each other's survival. and for the first time since Sarah's death. That possibility didn't terrify him. It felt like hope. The final week of their 30-day arrangement arrived with the subtle melancholy of a vacation's end. Neither Robert nor Catherine spoke directly about the approaching deadline, but it hung between them like a held breath, coloring every conversation and shared moment with the awareness that their time together was running out. Catherine's progress in recovery had been remarkable. She now shared at the Thursday evening AA meeting at St. Mark's, telling her story with a kind of honesty that helped newcomers believe that change was possible. Her hands no longer shook during morning coffee, and she'd gained weight that softened the sharp angles of stress in her face. Most importantly, she'd begun to laugh again, not the polite laughter of business meetings, but the genuine, unguarded sound of someone who'd remembered how to find joy in ordinary moments. But with recovery came a different kind of loneliness. As the fog of alcohol lifted, Catherine was confronting the stark reality of her isolation. She had business associates, employees, board members, and social acquaintances, but no real friends, no one who called just to check in, no one who cared about her well-being beyond its impact on quarterly earnings. "I've been thinking about after," she said one afternoon as they drove home from a therapy session. "After." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What about it? I don't want to go back to the way things were. The empty house, the pointless social events, the meetings where everyone pretends to care about my opinions while calculating how my decisions will affect their bottom line." "So don't go back," Robert said, though his heart was racing at the implications of her words. "It's not that simple. I have responsibilities, obligations." "You have choices," Robert interrupted. "Maybe not easy ones, but choices nonetheless." They drove in silence for several minutes before Catherine spoke again. "I keep thinking about that photo in my study, the one of my parents at the groundbreaking for their first hotel. They looked so happy, so proud of what they were building together. When did I stop caring about building something meaningful and start just trying to survive each day?" "When you stopped having people in your life who mattered more than business," Robert said gently. "When you forgot that success without connection is just expensive loneliness." Catherine turned to look at him. "Is that an invitation?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and risk in equal measure. Robert thought about Lauren, who'd grown attached to Catherine over the past month, who lit up when Catherine helped with homework or shared stories about her own college experiences. He thought about the way Catherine's face changed when she was in their apartment, how the mask of corporate competence fell away, replaced by something softer and more real. He thought about Sarah and the conversation they'd had just weeks before her death, about the importance of opening your heart even when it meant risking pain. "Life's too short to play it safe all the time," Sarah had said, watching Lauren practice violin with the fierce concentration of someone determined to master something beautiful. "Love is always a risk, Robert, but it's the only risk worth taking." "I don't know what I'm offering," Robert said honestly. "I drive a cab. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. I shop at thrift stores and clip coupons. My world is nothing like yours. Your world has Lauren's laughter and Mrs. Chen's dumplings and neighbors who know each other's names." Catherine said, "Your world has people who show up when someone needs help. Your world has security, opportunity, the ability to make a real difference in people's lives. Not without guidance, not without people who can remind me why the work matters." Catherine paused, then added quietly, "Not without you." That evening, they attended Lauren's school concert, something Catherine had asked to do since learning about it the week before. Robert watched his daughter perform a violin solo with the same pride he'd felt at every school event for the past 17 years. But tonight was different. Tonight, Catherine sat beside him in the auditorium, applauding enthusiastically and wiping away tears during Lauren's most emotional piece. "She's extraordinary," Catherine whispered during intermission. "You should be so proud." "I am. Every day she reminds me of myself at that age before I learned to be afraid of wanting things too much. Before I decided that caring about people was a liability." After the concert, they went for ice cream at a family-owned shop that had been Robert's tradition with Lauren since she was small. Catherine fit seamlessly into their routine, listening to Lauren's plans for college and offering advice about choosing majors and navigating financial aid applications. "I've been thinking about social work programs," Lauren said, stirring her chocolate chip mint with the focus of someone making important decisions. "There are some good ones in state, but the application deadlines are coming up fast." "Have you considered Northwestern?" Catherine asked casually. "They have an excellent social work program, and I know some people there who could help with the application process." Lauren's eyes widened. "Northwestern is expensive. Like, really expensive. So is staying in state if you factor in opportunity costs," Catherine said. "Sometimes investing more upfront pays off in the long run." Robert felt a familiar tension in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when Catherine first offered to pay for Lauren's therapy. He appreciated her generosity, but he worried about Lauren getting used to having doors opened by wealth and influence, rather than her own merit. "Lauren has earned everything she's gotten," he said carefully. "She'll earn her way into whatever school is right for her." "Of course she will," Catherine agreed. "But that doesn't mean she shouldn't have access to the same opportunities as students whose parents can write tuition checks without thinking twice." The conversation continued good-naturedly, but Robert sensed the underlying tension. Catherine's world offered possibilities that his never could, and he struggled with the ethics of exposing Lauren to opportunities they couldn't sustain without Catherine's continued involvement in their lives. Later that night, after dropping Catherine at her house, Robert and Lauren sat at their kitchen table with college brochures spread between them. "She's really something, isn't she?" Lauren said, running her finger along Northwestern's admission requirements. "She is." "Papa, can I ask you something? Do you like her? I mean, really like her?" Robert studied his daughter's face, seeing Sarah's directness and intuition in her expression. "Why do you ask?" "Because you're different when you're with her. Happier, I think, less worried about everything. And she's different, too, more like a regular person instead of someone putting on a performance." "It's complicated, sweetheart." "Love usually is," Lauren said with the wisdom of someone who'd observed human nature carefully for 17 years. "But that doesn't mean it's not worth it." "Who said anything about love?" Lauren smiled the same knowing smile Sarah used to give him when he was being deliberately obtuse. "Papa, I'm not blind. The way you two look at each other, the way she dropped everything to come to the hospital, the way you both get quiet whenever someone mentions the 30 days ending, that's not friendship. That's people falling in love who are too scared to admit it." Robert felt his face warm. "It's not that simple. We come from different worlds, have different expectations." "So did you and Mom," Lauren pointed out. "She was college educated, spoke 3 languages, came from a family of teachers. You were a high school dropout who worked with your hands, but you built something beautiful together." "That was different." "How?" Lauren challenged. Robert struggled to articulate the differences that seemed so obvious to him. "Your mother and I were young. We grew up together, learned about the world together. Catherine and I are middle-aged adults with established lives, set patterns, with enough life experience to know what matters and what doesn't." Lauren interrupted. "Papa, I've watched you for 3 years since Mom died. You've been a good father, a good neighbor, a good man, but you haven't been happy, not really, these past few weeks. Watching you with Catherine, this is the first time I've seen you look forward to tomorrow instead of just trying to get through today." That night, Robert lay awake staring at the ceiling, Lauren's words echoing in his mind. Was he in love with Catherine Reynolds? The question felt simultaneously obvious and impossible. He cared about her well-being, looked forward to their daily conversations, felt protective of her vulnerability, and proud of her progress. He admired her intelligence, her strength, her capacity for growth and change. But love implied a future together, shared dreams, merged lives. Love meant Lauren would grow up in Catherine's world of privilege and opportunity, but also pressure and public scrutiny. Love meant he would have to learn to navigate social situations where his background and education would always mark him as an outsider. Love meant taking the biggest risk of his life just when he'd finally achieved some measure of stability and peace. But as Robert drifted toward sleep, his last coherent thought was of Catherine's laughter during Lauren's concert, the way her face had glowed with genuine pride and affection. Whatever the risks, whatever the complications, he was already in deeper than he'd ever intended to be. The only question now was whether he had the courage to admit it to himself and to her before their time together ran out. Robert's phone woke him at 5:47 a.m. with a text notification that made his blood run cold. "I need you to come now. Something's happened." He was dressed and in his cab within minutes, the early morning streets of Boston almost empty as he raced toward Catherine's estate. His mind cycled through possibilities: a relapse, a medical emergency, a crisis with the board of directors. In the 3 weeks he'd known her, Catherine had never sent a message that sounded so urgent, so stripped of her usual composure. The front gate was open when he arrived, unusual for this hour. Margaret Wilson met him at the door, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. "Thank God you're here," she said, leading him through the house at a pace that bordered on running. "She's in the study. She won't talk to me, won't explain, just keeps saying she needs to see you." Robert found Catherine standing at her desk, still in yesterday's clothes, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. She was staring at documents spread across the polished surface, her expression a mixture of fury and despair that sent a chill through him. "Catherine." She looked up, and the raw vulnerability in her eyes made his chest ache. "You came." "Of course I came. What's happened?" She gestured to the papers on her desk. "These were delivered by courier an hour ago. Special delivery. Marked urgent. Apparently. Some things can't wait for business hours." Robert moved closer to examine the document's legal papers. Complex language about allegations and evidence and deposition schedules. His eyes caught a familiar name, his own. "What is this, a lawsuit?" Catherine said, her voice flat. "Filed by William Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Hotels. He's alleging that I engineered our entire situation as part of an elaborate fraud, that I hired you to rescue me that night outside Murphy's, that we planned the whole thing to generate sympathy with the board and distract from my alcoholism." Robert felt as if he'd been punched. "That's insane. Why would anyone believe that?" "Because he has photos," Catherine said, pushing a manila envelope toward him. "Taken by a photographer across the street. They show us talking before the police arrived, according to his legal team. They prove we knew each other, that we were conspiring." Robert opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were a dozen glossy photographs showing him steadying Catherine outside the jazz club. His hand on her arm, her face turned toward his, to an outside observer who wanted to see conspiracy. He supposed it could look like a planned meeting rather than a chance encounter. "These don't prove anything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've never met before that night. There are no phone records, no prior connection." "This is absurd." "Is it?" Catherine's voice was so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "The lawsuit alleges that I paid you $20,000 for your participation, which is exactly what I'm paying you now." The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and corrosive. Robert felt sick. "You can't possibly think I was part of some scheme." Catherine wouldn't meet his eyes. "What I think is that 3 weeks ago, I was a desperate alcoholic who would have done anything to save my company from William Blackwood's hostile takeover attempts. What I think is that $20,000 is a lot of money for a cab driver with a daughter starting college soon." "Stop!" Robert's voice was sharp. "Just stop. You know me. Catherine, you've spent nearly every day with me for 3 weeks. You've been to my home, met my neighbors, seen how I live. Do you honestly believe I would be capable of something like this?" "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered. "All I know is that everything I've built is at risk because I trusted someone I barely knew, because I let my guard down, because I started to think that maybe I could have something real in my life for once." Robert felt a surge of anger, unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah died. Not at Catherine, though her doubt cut deep, but at the faceless William Blackwood, who'd taken something fragile and beautiful and twisted it into something sordid. "I'm going to go now," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I think we both need some time to process this. But before I do, I want you to know something. I have never lied to you. Not once. Not about anything. I helped you that night because that's who I am, the same person who stops for stranded motorists in snowstorms, who carries Mrs. Chen's groceries up the stairs, who taught the neighborhood kids how to change a tire. I didn't know who you were, and I wouldn't have cared if I did." Catherine finally looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Robert, no." He held up a hand. "When you decide whether you trust me or not, you know where to find me. Until then, I think our arrangement is over." He walked out of the study, past a worried-looking Margaret, through the grand foyer with its gleaming marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and into the morning sunshine that somehow felt colder than when he'd arrived. His cab sat in the circular driveway, yellow and ordinary in his, as he pulled away from the Reynolds estate. Robert felt the weight of loss settling over him once again, familiar and yet different from when he'd lost Sarah. This wasn't the sudden severing of death, but the slow unraveling of possibility. In just 3 weeks, he'd allowed himself to imagine a future beyond survival, to believe that life might hold second chances, that his heart might have room for new love, and now, like a house of cards in a sudden breeze, it was collapsing around him. Lauren was already dressed for school when he arrived home, eating cereal at the kitchen table and scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw his expression. "Papa, what's wrong?" For a moment, Robert considered lying, manufacturing some minor disagreement to explain why he'd been summoned to Catherine's house at dawn, why he looked as if he'd aged 10 years in 2 hours. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Children deserve the truth, even when it's hard." "Catherine received some legal papers this morning," he said, settling into the chair across from Lauren. "A lawsuit filed by one of her business competitors. He's claiming that the night I helped her, the night I was arrested, was all part of some plan we cooked up together." Lauren's spoon clattered against her bowl. "That's ridiculous. You didn't even know her." "I know that. You know that. But he has photographs that make it look like we were meeting on purpose. And he's pointing to the money she's paying me as evidence of my involvement. But that's not fair. That's not what happened. Life isn't always fair, sweetheart." It was a hard truth, one he'd tried to shield her from for as long as possible. But at 17, with her mother gone and her father fighting to keep their heads above water, perhaps it was time she understood. "Does Catherine believe him?" Lauren asked, her voice small. Robert hesitated. The uncertainty in Catherine's eyes had been answer enough, but he didn't want to color Lauren's perception with his hurt. "She's confused, scared. When people are afraid of losing something important, they sometimes look for someone to blame. But she knows you. She's been to our home. She came to the hospital when I was sick." Lauren's voice rose with indignation. "How could she think you'd be part of something like that? People like Catherine are used to being surrounded by people who want something from them," Robert said, trying to be fair despite the ache in his chest. "It's hard for them to trust completely, and this lawsuit, it must have brought back all her old fears." Lauren was quiet for a moment, absently stirring her now soggy cereal. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Robert admitted. "I told her our arrangement is over until she decides whether she trusts me or not. And the money for my therapy, we'll figure something out." It was becoming his mantra, these 3 words that promised resolution without specifics. "Maybe Dr. Levinson can work with us on a payment plan." Lauren pushed away her bowl and stood, gathering her backpack with sharp, angry movements. "This is so stupid. You finally find someone who makes you happy, who gets you out of this apartment and makes you laugh again. And some rich jerk with a lawsuit ruins everything. Lauren, no, Papa, I'm mad. I'm allowed to be mad about this." She shouldered her backpack, then surprised him by leaning down to kiss his cheek. "I know you'll figure something out. You always do. But sometimes I wish you didn't have to." After she left for school, Robert sat at the kitchen table, staring at the framed photo of Sarah that Lauren kept on the windowsill. It was from their 10th anniversary trip to Cape Cod, Sarah laughing into the camera, her hair wild in the ocean breeze, her eyes alight with the joy of being alive. "What would you do," he asked the photo softly, "if someone accused you of the one thing you'd never do, if someone you were starting to care about doubted your integrity?" The phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. For a brief, hopeful moment, he thought it might be Catherine. But the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mitchell," he answered, his cab driver voice automatically kicking in. "Robert Mitchell." The voice was male, professional, with the practiced cadence of someone who spent a lot of time on the phone. "This is James Harrington from the law firm of Harrington, Weiss, and Klein. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Catherine Reynolds." Robert's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't think Miss Reynolds and I have anything to discuss through lawyers. Actually, I'm not calling about the lawsuit. I'm calling about your cab." "My cab?" "Yes, Ms. Reynolds has arranged for it to be picked up from your location within the hour. A driver will bring a replacement vehicle for your use during the remainder of your contract." Robert felt a surge of anger. "There is no remainder of the contract. I made that clear this morning. And nobody touches my cab." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers being shuffled. "I see. Well, Ms. Reynolds anticipated you might feel that way. She asked me to remind you that the contract specifies a 30-day period, and she intends to honor that commitment regardless of personal complications. The contract also specifies that I drive my own cab, not some fancy car that she provides. That was one of my conditions." "Ah, but there's a clause that allows for substitute transportation in the event of mechanical issues. The maintenance report on your vehicle indicates several safety concerns that need to be addressed immediately." "What maintenance report? Nobody's inspected my cab. The overnight diagnostic performed at the Reynolds Fleet Services garage last night." Robert's mind raced. His cab had been parked in his apartment complex lot all night. The only way it could have been inspected was if someone had moved it without his knowledge, or if they were lying. "Listen, Mr. Harrington, I don't know what game Miss Reynolds is playing, but I'm not interested. My cab stays with me. The contract is over. End of story. I understand your frustration, Mr. Mitchell, but I should warn you that breach of contract could result in legal action to recover the funds already paid to you, which I believe amount to $15,000 to date." The threat was clear. Fight this, and Catherine would demand her money-back money that Robert had already used to pay off credit card debt, catch up on rent, and start Lauren's college fund. Money he couldn't possibly return without taking out loans that would sink them even deeper. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Have your driver call me when they arrive. But I expect my cab back in perfect condition when this charade is over." "Excellent. Miss Britt Reynolds will be pleased. Oh, and one more thing, she's requested that you meet her at the downtown offices of Reynolds Hotels International at 3:00 p.m. today. The driver will have the address. And if I refuse, that would be most unfortunate, Mr. Mitchell. Most unfortunate indeed." The line went dead, leaving Robert staring at the phone in disbelief. In the space of a few hours, his relationship with Catherine had transformed from something warm and promising into a cold business arrangement enforced by legal threats. The woman who had cooked dinner in his apartment, who had rushed to the hospital when Lauren was sick, who had shared her deepest fears and vulnerabilities with him, was now hiding behind lawyers and contracts. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Unless Robert grabbed his laptop, a refurbished model that Lauren had insisted he needed, and typed William Blackwood Meridian Hotels into the search bar. The results painted a picture of a corporate raider with a reputation for aggressive takeovers, particularly targeting family-owned hospitality businesses. Several articles mentioned his long-standing interest in Reynolds Hotels and Catherine's consistent refusal to sell, even as other family-owned chains were absorbed into larger conglomerates. One article, dated just 3 weeks ago, caught his attention. Blackwood makes third bid for Reynolds Hotels. Board divided on response. The piece detailed growing pressure from some board members for Catherine to consider Blackwood's offer. Citing concerns about her leadership in the company's future direction, the timing couldn't be coincidental. 3 weeks ago, right around the time Robert had found Catherine outside the jazz club. Right around the time she'd started her recovery journey in earnest. What if the lawsuit wasn't just about discrediting Catherine? What if it was about forcing her into a position where selling to Blackwood seemed like the only option? And what if Catherine knew that Robert's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door? Through the peephole, he saw a young man in a suit holding a set of car keys. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm from Reynolds Fleet Services. I'm here about your cab." The downtown offices of Reynolds Hotels International occupied the top 5 floors of a gleaming glass tower that seemed to touch the clouds. Robert felt out of place the moment he stepped into the marble lobby. Acutely aware of his worn jeans and work shirt among the tailored suits and designer dresses of the corporate elite, the replacement vehicle, a sleek black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows, sat in the visitor's parking garage, looking as out of place in his life as he felt in this building. The young man who delivered it had been polite but firm. Robert's cab had been taken to the company's service center for critical maintenance and would be returned when the contract ended. In the meantime, he was expected to use the SUV for all transportation related to Miss Reynolds. It felt like a power play, a reminder of who controlled the resources in their relationship. At the reception desk, a poised young woman with a practiced smile checked his ID before directing him to the executive floor. "Ms. Reynolds is expecting you, Mr. Mitchell. The express elevator will take you directly to the 50th floor." The elevator was glass on 3 sides, offering a stomach-dropping view of Boston as it climbed higher and higher. Robert watched the city spread out beneath him, the familiar neighborhoods where he'd spent his entire life, looking like miniature dioramas from this height. Somewhere down there was his apartment, Lauren's school, Mrs. Chen's dumplings, the bodega where the owner still extended credit when times were tight. Up here was Catherine's world, a place of boardrooms and balance sheets, where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made between coffee and lunch. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area designed to impress original artwork on the walls, custom furniture that probably cost more than his annual income, fresh flowers arranged with artistic precision. Another receptionist, this one older and more reserved, greeted him by name. "Mr. Mitchell, Miss Reynolds asked that you be shown directly to the conference room. This way, please." The conference room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the harbor. A massive table of polished walnut dominated the space, surrounded by high-back leather chairs. At the far end, standing with her back to the door, was Catherine. She'd transformed back into the version of herself he'd first met at the police station, expertly tailored suit, perfect hair, jewelry that spoke of wealth without ostentation, every trace of the woman who'd laughed in his kitchen, who'd taught Lauren to make chicken piccata, who'd held his hand during AA meetings, had been carefully erased. "Thank you for coming," she said without turning around. "I appreciate your punctuality." "Did I have a choice?" Robert couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Your lawyer made it pretty clear what would happen if I didn't show up." Catherine turned then, and Robert was shocked by the exhaustion evident in her face, despite the perfect makeup and professional demeanor. Her eyes were hollow, haunted by something he couldn't name. "I apologize for Mr. Harrington's approach," she said. "He can be zealous in his interpretation of instructions. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it felt a lot like blackmail. Return the money or do as we say." Catherine gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. What I have to say will take some time, and I'd rather we both be comfortable." Robert remained standing. "I prefer to stand. Thanks. Just tell me what this is about so I can get back to figuring out how to salvage my life now that our arrangement is over." Something flickered across Catherine's face, hurt, perhaps, or regret, but it was quickly replaced by the professional mask she wore so well. "Very well. The reason I asked you here is to discuss next steps regarding William Blackwood's lawsuit. My legal team believes the most effective defense is a counteroffensive, filing our own lawsuit against Blackwood for defamation, corporate espionage, and tortious interference with business relationships. What does any of this have to do with me according to you? I might be part of Blackwood's scheme." "I never said that." Catherine's voice was sharp. You didn't have to. It was all over your face this morning. Catherine looked away, her composure cracking slightly. I was surprised, confused. The photographs show exactly what happened. Me helping a drunk stranger who turned out to be a billionaire? End of story. I know that now. Catherine turned back to him, her expression softening. I spent the morning reviewing security footage from Murphy's Jazz Club, which clearly shows us meeting for the first time. I've spoken with the bartender who served me, the valet who couldn't start my limousine, even the patrol officers who arrested you. Everything confirms what you've always said, that you stopped to help a stranger out of simple human decency. Congratulations on your thorough investigation, Robert said coldly. I'm so glad my integrity has been verified to your satisfaction. Now, if that's all, that's not all. Catherine moved toward him, closing the distance between them. Robert, I need to apologize. This morning, when those papers arrived, I panicked. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed old fears and suspicions to override what I know about you, what I've learned about you, what I've come to. She paused, searching for the right word. To feel for you. The sincerity in her voice made Robert's anger waver, but he held firm. That's the problem, isn't it, when push came to shove? Your first instinct was to doubt me, to believe that I might be capable of manipulating you, using you, conspiring against you. After everything we've shared, that's still where your mind went. Yes, Catherine admitted, and the simple honesty of it caught him off guard. Yes, that's where my mind went, because for most of my adult life, that's been my reality. People who approach me with agendas, who see me as a means to an end, who measure my worth by what I can provide. It was easier to believe you might be like everyone else than to trust that you're different. I am different, Robert said quietly. I've always been different. I know. Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. And I'm so sorry I forgot that. Even for a moment. They stood in silence for several heartbeats, the weight of hurt and hope suspended between them. Robert wanted to forgive her. The pain in her eyes was real, the regret genuine. But trust, once damaged, wasn't easily repaired. So what happens now, he finally asked. With Blackwood, with the lawsuit, with everything. Catherine seemed to gather herself, returning to the practical matters at hand. Now we fight back. The lawsuit isn't just about discrediting me or implying that you were part of some scheme. It's about weakening my position with the board, creating enough doubt about my leadership that they'll consider Blackwood's latest takeover offer. He's been trying to acquire Reynolds Hotels for years, and he sees my personal issues as an opportunity. And what do you need from me? Honesty, testimony, your account of what really happened that night. That's it. You didn't need to send lawyers and take my cab for that. You could have just asked. Catherine looked away, and Robert sensed there was more she wasn't saying. What else? Catherine, what aren't you telling me? She moved to the window, staring out at the harbor as if seeking courage in the distant horizon. Blackwood's legal team has been investigating you. They've interviewed your neighbors, Lauren's teachers, even your ex-brother-in-law in Chicago. They're looking for anything they can use to discredit your character, to make it seem plausible that you'd participate in a scheme like the one they're alleging. Robert felt cold dread settling in his stomach. My family has nothing to do with this. Lauren has nothing to do with this. I agree, which is why I've taken steps to protect them and you. What kind of steps? Catherine turned back to face him, her expression resolute. I've had your cab thoroughly serviced and upgraded with new safety features. I've arranged for enhanced security at your apartment building. I've established a trust for Lauren's education that can't be touched by litigation or settlement. And I've retained the best defense attorney in Boston to represent you, should Blackwood's people try to drag you into court. The scale of her response left Robert momentarily speechless, while he'd been angry about his cab being taken. She'd been methodically erecting protections around his life and Lauren's future. Why, he finally asked, why go to all this trouble for me? Because I care about you, Catherine said simply. Because what started as a business arrangement has become the most important relationship in my life, because the thought of you or Lauren being hurt because of me is unacceptable. Robert felt the anger that had sustained him throughout the day beginning to ebb, replaced by a confusion of emotions he couldn't quite name. This morning you thought I might be part of Blackwood's scheme. Now you're saying I'm the most important relationship in your life. That's quite a turnaround in 8 hours. Fear makes us stupid, Catherine said with a sad smile. But it doesn't have to make us cruel. This morning I was afraid of Blackwood, of the board, of losing everything my parents built. But most of all, I was afraid of losing you, of discovering that the connection I thought we had was just another illusion. And now I'm still afraid, but I'm choosing to trust what I know about you, what I've seen with my own eyes, what I've felt in my own heart. Catherine moved closer, close enough that Robert could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands that betrayed her nerves. I'm choosing to believe that sometimes extraordinary things happen for ordinary reasons, that a decent man might help a drunk woman simply because she needed help, that two people from different worlds might find something real together, that second chances exist if we're brave enough to take them. Robert wanted to believe her. Every part of him wanted to cross the distance between them, to take her hands, to say that trust worked both ways, and he was willing to try again. But something still held him back, some final reservation that needed addressing. The lawyers, the threats about the contract, taking my cab without permission, that wasn't about protecting me. That was about controlling the situation, making sure I showed up here so you could manage the narrative. That was the old Catherine, the CEO who solves problems with power and money. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her, but she didn't deny it. You're right. Part of me, the part that's run this company for 20 years, reverted to familiar patterns. When I'm scared, I seize control. When I'm hurt, I retreat behind lawyers and corporate resources. It's not my best self, but it's the self I've relied on to survive. I can't be with that version of you, Robert said quietly. I can't build anything real with someone who uses power imbalances as leverage when things get difficult. I know. And I don't want to be that person anymore. That's what these weeks with you have taught me, that there's a different way to live, to relate, to solve problems. Catherine took a deep breath. So I'm asking you, right now, what you need from me to move forward, not as my driver, not as my sober companion, but as whatever we might become to each other. The vulnerability in her question cracked something open in Robert's chest. This wasn't the CEO of Reynolds Hotels International speaking. This was just Catherine, a woman in recovery, a person trying to change, someone who'd made a mistake and was asking for another chance. I need honesty, he said. Always, even when it's hard. I need to know that you'll talk to me before you make decisions that affect my life or Lauren's. I need you to remember that I'm not an employee or an asset. I'm a person with dignity and agency, regardless of my bank account. Catherine nodded, her eyes never leaving his. What else? I need you to understand that I can't be bought or managed or controlled. If we're going to have any kind of relationship beyond these 30 days, it has to be as equals, different kinds of resources, different kinds of strengths, but equal in the ways that matter. I want that too, Catherine said softly. More than anything. Robert studied her face, looking for any sign of reservation or calculation. But all he saw was hope and determination, the same expression she'd worn at her first AA meeting, when she decided to change her life one day at a time. Then I think we start over, he said, extending his hand. Hello, I'm Robert Mitchell. I drive a cab, raise a remarkable daughter, and try my best to be a decent human being. Catherine's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. She took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she laced her fingers through his. Hello, Robert Mitchell. I'm Catherine Reynolds. I'm an alcoholic in recovery, the reluctant CEO of a hotel chain, and I'm pretty sure I'm falling in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and irrevocable. Robert felt his heart pounding in his chest, the sensation of her hand in his, anchoring him to this moment that suddenly felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. That's quite an introduction, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Too much too soon, she asked, uncertainty flickering across her face. No, Robert said, squeezing her hand gently. Just unexpected. Usually people wait until at least the second introduction to mention the love part. Catherine laughed the real laugh, the one he'd missed hearing this morning. I'm not very good at conventional timing. One of my many flaws you'll have to decide if you can live with. I think I can manage. Robert took a deep breath, his own feelings clarifying in the light of her honesty. I'm falling in love with you too. Catherine Reynolds. God help me. But I am. She stepped closer. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, that somehow reminded him of home. I was hoping you'd say that. Where do we go from here? Robert asked, suddenly aware that they were standing in the executive conference room of her company, surrounded by corporate trappings that represented everything that separated their worlds. First, we deal with Blackwood, Catherine said, her expression hardening with resolve. We show him that trying to destroy what we're building will be the biggest mistake of his career. Then we figure out the rest together, one day at a time. Isn't that what they say in AA? One day at a time, Robert agreed. But maybe we could start with getting my cab back. Catherine laughed again, and the sound was like a promise of better days ahead. Your cab is being detailed as we speak. New tires, new brakes, complete engine overhaul. It'll be like driving a brand new vehicle. Just still your cab. You had it serviced without asking me. I know, I'm sorry. Old habits. She looked genuinely contrite. I should have asked first, but the mechanic who inspected it said the brake lines had been tampered with, cut just enough to cause failure at low speeds. That's why your cab died outside Murphy's the night you found me. Robert felt cold shock wash over him. Tampered with? Are you saying? I'm saying Blackwood didn't just happen to have a photographer across the street that night. I'm saying what looked like a chance encounter might have been orchestrated, just not the way his lawsuit claims. The implications were staggering. If what Catherine was suggesting was true, then Blackwood had not only manufactured evidence for his lawsuit, but had potentially put lives at risk, including Robert's and Catherine's. We need to talk to the police, Robert said immediately. If someone deliberately sabotaged my cab, we will, Catherine assured him. But first, we need to gather all the evidence. The mechanic is preparing a detailed report. The security footage from Murphy's has been preserved. We're building a case that won't just defeat Blackwood's lawsuit, but will expose his methods to the board, to our shareholders, and if necessary, to criminal investigators. Robert shook his head, still processing this new twist. This is way beyond anything I'm used to dealing with. Corporate espionage, sabotage, this is like something from a movie. Not real life. Welcome to my world, Catherine said with a grim smile. Where business rivalries sometimes cross ethical and legal lines, where billions of dollars make people capable of things you'd never imagine. And you live with this every day. This is normal for you. Not the sabotage, no, but the ruthlessness, the win-at-all-costs mentality. Unfortunately, yes, it's why I started drinking in the first place, to numb myself to the reality of the world I inhabit, to forget, just for a few hours, the kind of people I have to deal with. Robert could see the weight of it in her eyes, the toll that living in such an environment had taken on her, in that moment. His remaining anger dissolved, replaced by a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since Sarah was alive. Well, you don't have to face it alone anymore, he said firmly. Whatever Blackwood throws at us, we'll handle it together. My world, your world, maybe it's time we built something new between them. Catherine's eyes shone with unshed tears. I'd like that, more than I can say. The tension of the day seemed to evaporate as they stood together, hands still clasped. The vast city spread out below them like a promise of possibilities. They were an unlikely pair, a cab driver and a hotel magnate, a widower and a recovering alcoholic, a man who'd spent his life working with his hands and a woman who'd spent hers working with her mind. But in that moment, standing in the fading afternoon light 50 floors above Boston, their differences seemed less like obstacles and more like complementary strengths, pieces of a puzzle that, when fitted together, might create something beautiful and unexpected and true. So, Robert said, breaking the contemplative silence, what's our next move against Blackwood? Catherine's smile was both determined and slightly mischievous, an expression he'd come to treasure in their weeks together. Our next move, Robert Mitchell, is to tell the truth. Loudly, publicly, and with evidence that will make William Blackwood wish he'd never heard of either of us. Sounds like a plan, Robert said, returning her smile. When do we start? We already have. Catherine gestured to the conference table, where folders and documents were neatly arranged at each place setting. The board will be here in an hour. I thought you might like to join us. Me at a board meeting. Robert couldn't hide his surprise. Why would they want to hear from me? Because you're the man Blackwood is accusing of conspiracy. Because you're the person who's helped me stay sober for 23 days, the longest I've been clean in 5 years. Because your integrity is the cornerstone of our defense. Catherine paused, then added softly, and because you're important to me, and it's time they understood that. The simplicity of her reasoning touched something deep in Robert's heart. After years of feeling invisible, of being the anonymous cab driver who moved through the city unnoticed, except by those who needed his services, Catherine was offering him not just recognition, but respect, a seat at a table where decisions were made, where his voice would be heard. All right, he said, I'll stay for the board meeting, but on one condition. Name it. Afterward, we pick up Lauren from her therapy session, get takeout from that Chinese place she loves, and have a normal, quiet evening. No lawyers, no corporate intrigue, just us. Catherine's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like joy. That sounds perfect. Absolutely perfect. As they prepared for the board meeting, reviewing documents and planning strategy, Robert felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would not be easy. Blackwood's lawsuit, the scrutiny of the board, the complexities of merging their different worlds, but for the first time since Sarah's death. He was moving towards something rather than just surviving each day as it came. And that something included Catherine Reynolds, a woman who saw him clearly, valued him honestly, and was brave enough to admit she was falling in love with him, despite every reason the world might give for why they shouldn't work. It wasn't what he'd expected when he stopped to help a drunk stranger outside a jazz club 23 days ago. It was better. It was real. And it was just beginning. The boardroom of Reynolds Hotels International fell silent as Robert finished speaking. 10 pairs of eyes belonging to some of the wealthiest and most influential people in Boston studied him with expressions ranging from skepticism to grudging respect. He'd just spent 20 minutes telling them exactly what had happened the night he met Catherine, answering their pointed questions with the straightforward honesty that had defined his life. "So you expect us to believe," said Harold Winthrop, the oldest board member, "that you had no idea who Catherine was when you stopped to help her?" "I didn't," Robert said simply. "I'm a cab driver, Mr. Winthrop. I don't follow hotel industry news or keep track of corporate CEOs. I saw someone who needed help, and I stopped. That's all there was to it. And now, 3 weeks later, you and Catherine are—" Winthrop's voice trailed off. Clearly uncomfortable with the personal direction of his question, Catherine, seated at the head of the table, answered for him. "Robert has been instrumental in my recovery. Harold, without his support, I wouldn't be sitting here today clear-headed, focused, and ready to fight William Blackwood's absurd allegations." "Yes, about those allegations," said Diane Chandler, the board's vice chair. "The photographs are concerning Catherine, whatever the actual circumstances. They create an impression that could damage shareholder confidence." "Which is exactly what Blackwood wants," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "He's counting on the board reacting to appearances rather than facts. But I believe I've presented compelling evidence that the entire situation was engineered by Blackwood himself, from the sabotage of Mr. Mitchell's cab to the conveniently positioned photographer." Robert watched the board members exchange glances, measuring their reactions. Most seemed cautiously aligned with Catherine, but a few, notably Winthrop and a silver-haired woman whose name he'd already forgotten, remained skeptical. What exactly are you asking of us? Catherine asked a younger man with rimless glasses who'd been introduced as the board's newest member. I'm asking for your trust and your support. Catherine said, I'm asking you to stand with me in rejecting Blackwood's lawsuit and his latest acquisition offer. I'm asking you to believe in the company. My parents built a company that succeeds by operating with integrity, not by surrendering to corporate raiders at the first sign of pressure. Winthrop cleared his throat. And your relationship with Mr. Mitchell. How do you propose we address that with stakeholders? Catherine's gaze shifted to Robert, a silent question in her eyes. They hadn't discussed how public their personal connection would become, hadn't defined what they were to each other beyond the admission of growing feelings shared in this very room hours earlier. My relationship with Robert is not a corporate asset to be managed or a liability to be mitigated, Catherine said firmly. It's personal, it's private, and it's separate from my responsibilities as CEO. What matters for this discussion is that Blackwood is using that relationship, twisting its origins and nature, to create leverage for his takeover attempt. The board meeting continued for another hour, moving through financial projections, legal strategies, and public relations considerations. Robert listened more than he spoke, impressed by Catherine's command of complex details and her calm refutation of every concern raised. This was Catherine in her element, the capable executive who'd built Reynolds Hotels into an industry leader while maintaining the family values her parents had established. It was a side of her he'd glimpsed, but never fully appreciated until now, when the meeting finally concluded. The board members filed out with murmured goodbyes and curious glances at Robert. Only Diane Chandler lingered, approaching them as the room emptied. You've put us in a difficult position, Catherine, she said, her voice low but not unkind. But for what it's worth, I believe you, and I believe him. She nodded toward Robert. There's an authenticity here that Blackwood could never manufacture. Thank you, Diane, Catherine said. That means a great deal. After Chandler left, Catherine collapsed into her chair with an exhausted sigh. Well, that went better than I expected. No one resigned, no one threatened to sell their shares, and Winthrop only mentioned my father's legacy twice. Robert smiled, reaching for her hand across the polished surface of the conference table. You were incredible. I had no idea you could juggle so many complex issues while making it look effortless. Hardly effortless, Catherine admitted, squeezing his hand. I'm running on adrenaline and 3 cups of coffee, but having you here knowing you were on my side made all the difference. I am on your side, Robert said. Today, tomorrow, for however long you want me there. Catherine's expression softened, the corporate mask falling away to reveal the woman he'd come to care for deeply. I think I'll want you there for quite some time. Robert Mitchell, is that going to be a problem? The only problem, he said, checking his watch, is that we're going to be late picking up Lauren if we don't leave now, and she gets cranky when she's hungry after therapy. Catherine laughed, the sound lighter and more carefree than he'd heard all day. We can't have that. Let's go get your daughter and that Chinese food you promised me. Board meetings and billion-dollar lawsuits can wait until tomorrow. As they drove through the evening streets of Boston in Robert's freshly serviced cab, Catherine had insisted they leave the Lincoln Navigator in the corporate garage. Robert found himself marveling at the strange turns his life had taken. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a struggling widower focused solely on survival. Now he was driving away from a corporate boardroom with a billionaire CEO who just declared their relationship personal and private in front of Boston's business elite. Life, it seemed, had not finished surprising him yet. So let me get this straight, Lauren said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks with practiced ease. This Blackwood guy had your cab sabotaged so you'd break down outside the jazz club where Catherine was, hoping she'd do something embarrassing that he could use against her. They were seated around the small kitchen table in Robert and Lauren's apartment, surrounded by takeout containers from Golden Dragon. Catherine had changed from her business suit into jeans and a borrowed sweatshirt of Lauren's, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her feet bare on the linoleum floor. That's our theory, Catherine confirmed. We're still gathering evidence, but the mechanics report is pretty conclusive. The brake lines were deliberately cut, not enough to cause a catastrophic failure, but enough to ensure the cab would die at low speed. That's seriously messed up, Lauren declared. He could have hurt someone. He could have hurt you. Papa? I'm fine, sweetheart, Robert assured her. And now that we know what we're dealing with, we can fight back properly. How? Lauren asked, reaching for another spring roll. I mean, this guy sounds like a total psycho, and he's obviously super rich and powerful if he's trying to buy Catherine's company. Catherine and Robert exchanged glances. They'd agreed to be honest with Lauren about the situation, but neither wanted to worry her unnecessarily. We're going to use the truth, Catherine said. We're gathering evidence of what really happened, and we're going to make it public before Blackwood can control the narrative with his lawsuit. Like a press conference, Lauren's eyes widened, with cameras and reporters and everything. Something like that, Robert acknowledged. Catherine's legal team thinks it's the best approach. Get ahead of the story. Present the facts clearly. Show that we have nothing to hide. But what about your privacy? Won't everyone be all up in your business, asking about, you know? Lauren gestured between them, her implication clear. Yes, Catherine said frankly. People will be curious about our relationship. They'll ask intrusive questions. They'll speculate and gossip and probably make up things that aren't true. That sounds awful, Lauren grimaced. Why would anyone choose to live like that? Sometimes we don't choose our battles, Catherine said, her voice gentle. Sometimes they choose us. But I believe that living truthfully even under scrutiny is better than hiding or letting someone like Blackwood control the story of who we are and what we mean to each other. Robert felt a surge of pride at Catherine's words. Despite her years in the corporate spotlight, despite the protective layers she'd built around herself, she was choosing vulnerability and honesty not just in private, but potentially before the entire world. What about school? Lauren asked, turning to her father. What about Mrs. Chen and the neighbors? Are they going to be, like, hounded by reporters or something? I hope not, Robert said, though the possibility had been weighing on him. Catherine's team is working on strategies to minimize the impact on our lives, but there might be some temporary disruption. Lauren was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. I don't care about myself, she finally said. People at school already think I'm weird because I actually like studying and I work at the library. But Mrs. Chen, she's getting older, and this kind of stress isn't good for her. I've thought about that, Catherine said. If it becomes necessary, I can arrange for Mrs. Chen to stay at one of our properties somewhere comfortable and private, with any medical support she might need. The same offer extends to both of you. Of course, Robert started to protest, but Catherine held up a hand. It's not charity, Robert. It's pragmatism. If Blackwood escalates this fight, and I believe he will having you somewhere secure and monitored makes strategic sense, she's right, Papa, Lauren said, surprising him with her support. We don't have to hide, but we don't have to make it easy for them either. Robert looked between his daughter and Catherine, struck by how quickly they'd formed an alliance. There was something of Sarah in the way Lauren evaluated problems and solutions, practical, unsentimental, focused on the greater good. All right, he conceded. If things get too intense, we'll consider temporary relocation, but not to one of your hotels. Catherine, that would just feed into Blackwood's narrative about me being on your payroll. Fair point, Catherine acknowledged. We'll find an alternative if it becomes necessary. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished dinner. Lauren's upcoming school orchestra performance, a new exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts that Catherine thought they might enjoy. Plans for the weekend that carefully avoided mentioning the 30-day contract that was rapidly approaching its conclusion. After dinner, while Lauren tackled homework at her desk, Robert and Catherine cleaned up together, falling into the domestic rhythm they'd established during her cooking lessons. This feels normal, Catherine said quietly as she dried a plate Robert had washed. Being here, with you and Lauren, doing ordinary things. I forgot what normal felt like. Is it a good feeling? Robert asked, handing her another plate. The best, she admitted. Better than closing a major deal or seeing our stock price rise. Better than anything I've felt in years. If I'm being honest, Even with Blackwood's lawsuit hanging over us, even with the board watching your every move, Catherine set down the dish towel and turned to face him fully. Yes, even with all that, because this us feels real in a way that nothing in my life has felt since my parents died. You and Lauren, you see me, Robert, not the CEO, not the Reynolds heir, not the alcoholic mess I was becoming, just me. The vulnerability in her voice touched something deep in Robert's heart, without thinking. He closed the distance between them, cradling her face in his still damp hands. I see you, Catherine Reynolds. I see all of you. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question as much as an answer. When they separated, Catherine's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if she was memorizing the feeling. I wasn't sure if we were ready for that, she whispered when she finally looked at him. Neither was I, Robert admitted, but it felt right. It did, she agreed, a smile spreading across her face. Very right. The sound of Lauren's bedroom door opening had them stepping apart like teenagers caught by parents, though not quickly enough to escape notice. Finally, Lauren said, rolling her eyes as she headed for the refrigerator. I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out. Figure what out? Robert asked, feeling his face warm. Lauren grabbed a soda, giving them both a look of exasperated affection. That you're good together, that you make each other happy, that this thing between you is worth fighting for. Even if some corporate jerk is trying to ruin it, Catherine laughed, the sound bright and surprised. When did you get so wise about relationships? Lauren Mitchell. I read a lot of books, Lauren said with a shrug, and I've been watching my dad be alone for 3 years. He deserves someone who looks at him the way you do. Shenam, before either adult could respond to that remarkably perceptive statement. Lauren's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from amusement to concern. What is it? Robert asked immediately. It's Jenna from school, Lauren said, still staring at her phone. She just sent me a link to some gossip site. There's a story about you guys, with pictures. Robert and Catherine moved as one to look over Lauren's shoulder at the phone screen. The headline made Robert's stomach drop. Hotel Heiress Catherine Reynolds caught in scandalous affair with cab driver. Beneath it was a photograph taken just hours earlier. Robert and Catherine leaving the Reynolds Hotel's building together, his hand at the small of her back. Both of them smiling in a way that could only be described as intimate. How did they? Robert began, but Catherine was already scrolling through the article, her expression hardening with each swipe. William Blackwood, she said, her voice cold. He's quoted extensively, expressing concern about my judgment and the potential impact on the company. This isn't journalism. It's a press release disguised as gossip. It gets worse, Lauren said, taking back her phone to scroll further. There are pictures of our apartment building, Papa, and they mention where I go to school. Robert felt a surge of protective anger, unlike anything he'd experienced since the night he was arrested. This crosses a line. They can say what they want about me, but dragging my daughter into it. I need to make some calls, Catherine said, her CEO persona sliding back into place like armor. We need to get ahead of this now, before it spreads further. Within minutes, she was pacing the small living room, phone pressed to her ear, issuing rapid-fire instructions to what Robert assumed was her public relations team. Her voice was controlled but authoritative, every inch the powerful executive managing a crisis. No, that won't work. We need a statement tonight, not tomorrow. Yes, I'm aware of the implications. No, absolutely not. We do not confirm or deny personal details. Focus on Blackwood's clear attempt to manipulate media coverage during pending litigation. Lauren had retreated to her bedroom, but Robert could see her through the partially open door, sitting on her bed, phone in hand, presumably reading more about the situation online. The sight filled him with a mixture of guilt and resolve. This was exactly what he'd feared his private life. And worse, Lauren's. Becoming collateral damage in a corporate war he barely understood. Robert, Catherine called, covering the phone's microphone with her hand. My team wants to know if you'd be willing to make a statement. They think having you speak directly would undercut Blackwood's narrative. Huh. What would I need to say? Just the truth. That we met when you helped me during a vulnerable moment. That we've developed a genuine connection